What would you do in your life if you knew it were impossible for you to fail? What grand adventure would you go on? What lofty goals would you accomplish? And who would go with you? What would you do if you knew it were impossible for you to fail? That's a dynamite question, isn't it? Well, you know, I had to ask myself the same question that I'm asking you. And it was many, many years ago. Actually, I remember first asking that question. I was on a construction site as an iron worker, and we were way up there on the steel, and another man and I were working together, and this man's name was Freddie. And Freddie had just climbed down a column, went over to his lunch bucket, opened the lunch bucket up, and took out a bottle of Maalox. Took a drink out of it, and I said, "Freddie, what are you doing? Why are you drinking the Maalox?" And he said, "This work scares the heck out of me." And I said, "Then Fred, why don't you do something else? What if you could do anything in the entire world and you knew you wouldn't fail? What do you think you'd do? What would you like to do?" And he said, "Oh, that's an easy question." Now, this is interesting because for him, it was an easy question. For most of us, it's a difficult question. He said, "What I'd love to do is to work on my farm, to take that little farm I've got and turn it into a working farm." And he said, "And then in my lake, I'd raise fish. That's what I'd really like to do." And I said, "Freddie, what's stopping you right now?" Interestingly, I heard my own voice. And at that point, I asked myself the question, what would I do if I could do anything in the entire world and I knew I couldn't fail at it? Well, my friends, I'm doing it right now. I'm doing it right now. But unfortunately, so many people procrastinate. Procrastination is the art of keeping up with yesterday. They procrastinate on their goals. They procrastinate on their dreams. They procrastinate on their desires. And all of these things can come true if you just but act on them. But how do we act? Well, as a human family, we act more like caterpillars than the way we were meant to act. Now, by that I mean, if you took some caterpillars, and particularly this type of caterpillar, which is called a processionary or pine caterpillar, and you took the little fellers, you put them on a desk, and here they went, one right after the other, they will follow each other in a circle. You can even take caterpillar food and put caterpillar food right in the center of that circle, and they'll still go around in a circle. In fact, it is said that the processionary or pine caterpillar will follow each other caterpillar to such a point that they'd even die, that starve to death with food right in the center between them. Humans, very much the same way. When we have opportunities just laid before us, and all we have to do is avail ourselves of those opportunities and have anything you want, do anything you want. This world is a cornucopia. It's a horn of plenty that showers anything and everything upon you. All you have to do is but ask. Well, it's been many, many years since that day on that construction site. It was shortly after that conversation that I left that work for good, because I learned the secret of money magic, and that's why you're watching this right now. I learned the secret of money magic, and that's what I want to share with you. Oh, by the way, it wasn't too long ago, a few years back, that some people came to visit me. And the folks that came to visit me happened to have the paper, the newspaper, of their local area. And they said, "You know, the strangest thing, I want to show you this newspaper. Strangest article in here. Here's a man who had worked all his life And it was his last day before he retired, the last day of work, last day of employment. And he got killed on the job that day. And I said, that's odd. Can I see the paper? They handed me the paper. I took the paper and I looked. And I said, do you know? I know this person. It was Freddie, the iron worker. So what would you do if you knew it were impossible for you to fail? Please, think about that one. Okay, so now you know exactly what it is that you really want to accomplish. You know what that one thing is that you would love to do. Now, perhaps it's something that you want to acquire, like a home. A lot of people have that goal, and that's certainly a very worthy goal. I'd like to share with you a story. This is an account about when I went home hunting. I had a burning desire for a particular piece of property. I knew where it was. It was up on the side of a mountain overlooking a beautiful lake, a beautiful big fishing lake. And this little piece of property was to be somewhere on that hillside. Now, as I went to search for it, nothing seemed to become available. But I kept looking in the newspapers, I kept watching the classified, I asked people, but I had a burning desire. I could see it in my mind's eye that that's just exactly where I wanted to be. Well, as the time passed, the winter weather started upon us. And this particular day, as I was reading the classified, I saw an ad for a house right there where I wanted to be. However, on that particular day, the snow started to fly and the winter advisories were being broadcast all over the place. A blizzard was coming. Now, how do you strike when the iron is hot when it's icy cold? Well, on that day, I just got in my four-wheel drive and I seemed to be the only person on the road. I went up and I found that little house that was advertised. Got out, trudged through the snow, reached up on a little wood pile there and pulled myself up so I could look in the windows. And I could see this beautiful home, hardwood floors, beautiful fireplace, beautiful porch overlooking this gorgeous lake. And I said, yes, I'd like to buy this. So I called the realtor that had the listing. And the realtor said, look, I haven't seen the property yet. I just took the listing. And I just advertised it, and I'm not coming out in a snowstorm. This can wait until after the storm is over. So I said to the realtor, I said, look, if you're not going to come out here, why don't I meet you at your office? And he said, oh no, I'm not even going to go to my office. And I said, what if I come to your home? And he said, I think you're crazy. But okay, you come to my home. So I went to the realtor's home, and when I went in there, I told him, I said, I want to make an offer on that piece of property. And so he said, okay, we'll get the paperwork filled out. We filled out the paperwork, and I said, would you call that person, the owner, and give him the offer right now? And he said, okay, I'll call him. Picked up the phone, called the man, and there seemed to be some tension in the conversation. And oddly enough, the realtor said, look, here, you talk to him, and handed me the phone. I took the phone and I said, my name is Peter, and I'd like to make an offer on that piece of property that you've got. Can you tell me something about it? Why are you wanting to sell it? And I had a series of questions. And the man explained to me that he had built the home himself. just finished it. That home was to be for he and his mother. His mother had just died. Tremendous tragedy. The man had lost his job. The bank was about to repossess the property. And as we spoke, the man took a liking to me, and I took a liking to him, and I felt really, really sad for his plight. And I said, I don't want to insult you or hurt your feelings, but I'd like to offer you $7,500 for the house. The man said, look, you can have that. I'd rather give it to you for that amount of money than to have the bank take it. It's yours. Well, I bought the house, and when I went there and I looked at the house, inside the house were all these tools, all these construction tools that went with the property. Not only that, as I went into the kitchen, I could see the refrigerator had a brand new sticker on it, had never been used. The stove was brand new, it still had the sticker on it. All the appliances were brand new. Brand new house, never lived in, 3 bedrooms, beautiful fireplace, huge porch overlooking a gorgeous lake. How did that happen? Well, it happened because I struck when the iron was hot. It's just like a blacksmith. A blacksmith gets the iron hot, then puts it on the anvil, and then he strikes it and molds it to that which he wants. Now, if you take the attitude that if it's to be, it's up to me, you'll find yourself creating amazing opportunities in your life, because what you want wants you. This is the law of the universe. And as long as you recognize that what you want wants you just as much, what you want is racing toward you just like you're moving toward it. Anything and everything. This world is a cornucopia. It's a horn of plenty, showering down everything and anything that you want, as long as you don't get in your own way. That is striking when the iron is hot. Sometime later, after I had moved into the home, I noticed that there was other property adjoining it that would be a nice addition. I didn't know who owned it, so I went to the courthouse to find out who owned that piece of property. I noticed also that just down the road a bit was another lot, not quite as nice, but it sold for thousands of dollars. So I figured, well, you know, the property values are certainly going up on this area. When I found out who owned the piece of property, I traveled to the little town where the owner lived. And I called the owner and I asked if I could please just come by for a moment. I'd like to talk to him about his property. So as I got there, they invited me in, and it was an elderly couple. Nice couple. I asked them, you know, how'd you come to live in this town? When did you buy that piece of property? How long have you kept the piece of property? What were you going to do with the property? And why did you originally buy the property? And all sorts of questions like that. Those are the 6 magic words, by the way. You ask those open-ended questions, and then you listen. You listen as people talk. And they were so cordial, so friendly. I had established a base of rapport with that couple. Then finally I broached the question. I said, you know that I would like to be the new owner of that piece of property. What would it take for me to own that property? And he looked, the elderly man looked at his wife. She looked at him and she said, well, what do you think, honey? And he said, well, Ma, how about what we paid for it? And she said, well, I think that's pretty good. And he said, young man, how about what I paid for it? And I said, and how long have you had the property? And he said, 13 years. And you paid taxes on it for 13 years? And he said, well, I'll take care of the tax part of it. You can have it for what I paid for. $350. I was very, very appreciative. They were happy to be rid of it, and I was so happy to have it. It was a mutual arrangement, and that certainly is the magic, money magic. You have to prospect. You have to ask for what you want. So if you will prospect for gold, you will find gold, and ask for what you want. Listening brings wonderful rewards. If you will but just listen to what people have to say, you'll be rewarded immensely. Now, most people hear what people say, but you see, you hear with your ear and you listen with your heart. Another piece of property that I came across. This piece of property was a beautiful mountain ridge. It had 100 acres. This 100 acres was being bid upon. Some wealthy investors wanted to buy it from an old man who lived way back in the forest. Actually, he lived at the end of what they called a holler. And you had to go through the creek 3 times to get where the man lived. He'd lived there his entire life. It was an old Virginia land grant that his grandfather had. And the property had been divided up. He was born and raised there and lived way back in there without electricity or running water. And I went out there to see the old man. And I asked him, I said, would you be interested in selling the property? And he said, you know, son, I had some real wealthy people come out here offering me big money for that property, and I told them flat out, no, I'm not interested in selling it. What do you want it for? And I said, well, I'd love to have that piece of property so I could build a log cabin on it. I'd like to live on it. I don't want to develop it. I want it for myself. He said, well, come on in. I went in. We sat there in the room as the evening came on, and all you could see was the light of the stove. It was a little old pot-belly stove. And he'd sit there, rocking in his rocking chair, and he'd spit a little tobacco in the stove, and it was very interesting. And he told me all about his life. He told me about how he came to live there. He even showed me the old Virginia land grant. It was all written by hand, in pen, with perfect penmanship. It was really a very, very interesting evening. As we sat there by the glowing embers of that stove, he said, you know, been offered big money for that property. And I said, yes, I do know that. And he said, I'm an old man now, don't have that many years to live, and I'm not going to sell that property to those people, no matter how much they offer me. He said, how much you got? And I said, well, I don't want to insult you, but I don't have very much. I have about $3,500. The $3,500, he says, you know, they offered me a lot of money for that property. 35 wouldn't even touch it. And we sat there in the quiet and rocked. And he said, you know, years ago had a dream, had a vision. I thought what I'd love to do was go on that ridge and build a log cabin and live up there on that ridge. It's a beautiful view up there. He said, would you like to do that? And I said, I'd love to do that. And he says, will you do that? And I said, yes, I will do that. And he leaned over, looked at me, and he said, you promise, if I let you have that piece of property, that you go up there and build a log cabin up there and do what I wanted to do to fulfill my dream? And I said, yes, I will. I promise that I will. Well, at that point he said, you can have it for $3,500. 100 acres, all yours. I was shocked that he took my offer. I was delighted. Then he leaned back in his chair a little bit and he said, you know, a piece of land's not worth much without mineral rights. I leaned forward and I said, yes, I know that. And he said, I'm going to give you the mineral rights too. You're going to get the mineral rights. And not only are you going to get the mineral rights, but I'm going to give you the gas well. There's a gas well on that property. You need to have that. And lo and behold, I had a treasure simply because I was able to listen and listen intently. Well, sure enough, I built that log cabin up on that ridge. Built a beautiful log cabin, cut every log myself. Put in hardwood floors, pegged them with walnut pegs, built a big, beautiful stone fireplace. And I could sit up there on my porch and look out over miles and miles of blue ridges. Did just as the old man said. Well, he passed away. And of course, in time, I did sell the property. Every month, however, I received a royalty check for the gas. The last royalty check I received before I sold the property was $4,600 for that month. My friends, listening certainly pays. If you listen, listening will bring great opportunities. So as I said about listening, it brings about great opportunities. But not only that, when you are yourself, being yourself brings a lot of attention to you. That old log cabin that I built up there, it received so much publicity that I found myself in the newspapers. They put it on the front page of the Sunday newspaper. People came to find who this man was that would build a log cabin by hand and do all the things that I did with that. Next thing I knew, I was found in several different books by psychologists, people who were studying self-actualized individuals. So it was very interesting the way everything evolved. And that brought on visitors. One of the visitors that came was this fellow. Here he came humping and bumping out that ridge in his Lincoln Continental. Delightful man. He would just come out there just to sit and talk to me. He said, you know, I always wanted to do something like this. Always wanted to build a log cabin like you did. And he said, do you want to sell this? And I said, well, at that point I said, not for a bit. Not for a while yet. And he said, if you sold it, what would you do? And I said, well, I have a image in mind of another home. And this one is higher on a bigger mountain with an even more distant view. And I described the home in detail. I described what the windows looked like, what the carpet would be like, what the living room would be like. I described how tall the fireplace would be, like the one behind me, stretching up 18 feet tall. Huge, massive stones, 5-foot opening. I described all of that to this man. And he said, you know, you're about as crazy as my daughter. You ought to meet her. And I said, I would be happy to. And so the man brought his daughter to meet me. Well, Anne is right upstairs right now. That was a long, long time ago. That man happened to be her father. And yes, just as I had said, this is the way it unfolded. This is exactly what money magic is all about. You've got to have a dream if you want to make a dream come true. And if you have that dream and you visualize it and you see it clearly, there's not a thing in the universe that can stop it from manifesting itself. Manifestation is a matter of clarity of vision. If you have the clarity of vision and you know what you want, you know what you're going to have, in your mind's eye, it is just simply a matter of having the pieces come together. So, what happened from that point, I ended up in Florida, living on the beach, the beautiful luxury condominium overlooking the ocean. And Anne and I would sit there in the evening watching the sailboats sailing on the ocean, enjoying the sea breezes and the beautiful hibiscus flowers. It was just a lovely setting. And because of the money magic that I had created, a lot of people were coming to see me, wanting to know how to manifest their dreams. And so we started conducting workshops in creative visualization. And even that small group of people, all of them had their manifestation. The manifestation of their visions, the manifestation of their creative visualizations. And then they asked me, what is yours? And again, I described a beautiful home up upon a mountain, looking as far as the eye can see. And I said, it's up in Tennessee. And I'm going to go up there and find this piece of property adjoining a national park and show you my manifestation. And so they eagerly listened to what I had to say. Well, lo and behold, I ended up here in Tennessee, found that piece of property that the realtors said didn't even exist, that there wasn't any such property available, that it would be a rarity to find that many acres adjoining the park. And I said, no, I know it's there. And the realtor that I had contacted, Mike was his name, Mike said, how can you be so certain? And I said, Mike, because I see it in my mind's eye. And I know if I can see it clearly, it will manifest. It is there. Well, it just happened to be that a person was putting up a sign along the road. I went down, saw the sign, went up, looked at the property, said, that's it. I took the sign down. Well, the person that put the sign up called the man that owned this piece of property and told him, look, Richard, somebody just tore my sign down to advertise your property. He got angry, furious. Well, by the time I had the realtor call him, he was hot. He said, why did that man take my sign down? And the realtor just said, well, he said he was going to buy that. And he said, well, he hadn't made me an offer yet. And the realtor said, well, yes, I have the offer right here. And he said, okay, what is it? He gave him the offer. There was silence on the other end of the phone. He said, I'm not selling the property for that. Hung up on the realtor. Mike said, look, the guy hung up on me. I said, that's okay, Mike. He just didn't understand your offer clearly enough. Go back and present it again. He did it a second time. A second time the man hung up. He did it a third time. The third time he hung up again. And Mike said, I'm not calling him again. I'm not going to call him again. The man said he doesn't want to sell the property anymore. And I said, yes, he does. And he says, well, how do you know that? I said, because I see it in my mind's eye. I know that what you want wants you. Whatever you want with intensity, with a burning desire, that same thing is rushing towards you as you are moving toward it. It's a law of the universe. Well, to make a long story short, the day that Richard, who is a wealthy man who had this piece of property, came up to see what we did with it, he walked up here, looked at the house, and he laughed and he said, I shouldn't have done it. I shouldn't have done it. Well, he had sold the property to us. And oddly enough, he said he didn't even want to be paid that year, that we could wait. He had already made too much money. But he looked at the house and he said, I shouldn't have done it. I didn't realize what could be done with this piece of property and how beautiful you made it look. And so as we sat here by this fireplace together, Richard shared his dreams with me. He said, you know, if you can work this money magic, he said, I have a building downtown I'd like to buy. If you could get it at a certain price, well, I'd be very happy to reward you. Well, you know, it was sort of odd because I was joking about getting a white Rolls Royce. Now, you know, that's quite a big dream for a previously unemployed iron worker, uneducated, unemployed, in so many years' time to go from nothing to all of this. And while I was joking about it, I realized that you have to be careful what you joke about. So as we sat here by the fireplace, Richard says, if you can get them to sell, I'll give you my white Rolls Royce that I have in the garage in Florida. And I said, well, I think I've already worked money magic. Yes, we are money magnets. We have that attractive power, the power to attract into our lives anything and everything. This world, this life, is an unlimited universe. It's filled with plenty. There are more than enough stars in the sky. Not just one. There's so many stars you can't even count them. There's more than enough planets. There's more than enough trees and mountains and streams and rivers. There's more than everything. Every single thing in creation is in abundance. And why should you live in lack? No, there is no need to live in lack. All we need to do is work money magic. And we can have all of this. It's what you bargain for. You can bargain for a little bit, or you can ask for a lot. It's all there available. That's what money magic is all about. I'd like to leave you with a lovely poem. This is one that has inspired me, and I'm certain will inspire you. I bargained with life for a penny, and life would pay no more. However, I begged at evening when I counted my scanty store. For life is a just employer. He gives you what you ask. But once you have set the wages, why, you must bear the task. I worked for a menial's hire, only to learn dismayed that any wage I had asked of life, life would have willingly paid. Thank you, my friend, for being with me. Thank you for sharing this time together. Thank you for listening and watching Money Magic.
For more information on Peter Ragnar, including other courses, books, tapes, CDs, and seminars, you can log online at www.roaringlionpublishing.com or call 1-800-491-7141 or write to Roaring Lion Publishing, P.O. Box 1515, Gatlinburg, Tennessee 37738.